We tend to think of prehistory in terms of dinosaurs. T. Rex, Triceratops, Brachiosaurus, the giants that ruled the Mesozoic. But before the dinosaurs, there was another world entirely. A world stranger, more alien, and in many ways even more terrifying. This is the Permian period, stretching from 299 to 252 million years ago, long before a single dinosaur had taken its first step. The Permian was a time of extremes. The supercontinent Pangaea dominated the globe, creating vast inland deserts and powerful monsoon systems unlike anything today. And it was ruled not by reptiles as we know them, but by a remarkable and diverse group of creatures called synapsids, animals that were neither fully reptile nor fully mammal. Synapsids are defined by a single temporal fenestra, a hole in the skull behind the eye socket that allowed for more powerful jaw muscles. It sounds subtle, but it changed everything. The earliest synapsids were the pareiasaurs, and the most famous of these was an animal with a dramatic sail on its back, Dimetrodon. Dimetrodon lived roughly 295 to 272 million years ago. It is one of the most commonly mistaken animals in history. It is not a dinosaur. It predates them by over 40 million years. In fact, Dimetrodon is more closely related to you than it is to any dinosaur. It sits on the lineage that eventually led to mammals and to humans. Dimetrodon's famous sail is thought to have been used for thermoregulation, absorbing sunlight in the morning to warm up faster than its rivals, giving it an early morning hunting advantage. Some Dimetrodon species reached over 3 meters in length and had 2 types of teeth, sharp canines and cutting incisors, making it a highly efficient apex predator. But Dimetrodon was just one of many incredible Permian creatures. Alongside it lived the catastrophically, massive, barrel-bodied plant eaters with tiny heads on enormous bodies. Catalorhinchus, a catastrophid, was one of the largest land animals of its time, measuring up to 6 meters long and weighing as much as a small car. Meanwhile, the oceans of the Permian teemed with their own monsters: giant sharks, coelacanths, and a bizarre array of marine reptiles already beginning to colonize the seas. One of the most fearsome marine predators of the Permian was Helicoprion, a shark with a bizarre spiral tooth whorl in its lower jaw, like a circular saw blade inside its mouth. Scientists puzzled over Helicoprion's spiral tooth fossil for over a century before CT scanning finally revealed exactly where it sat in the jaw. The answer was stranger than anyone expected. As the early Permian progressed, a new and more advanced group of synapsids emerged, the therapsids. These were the true ancestors of all mammals, and they were extraordinary. Unlike their sprawling pelycosaur predecessors, many therapsids had a more upright posture. Their legs were beginning to move under their bodies, a revolutionary change. Among the most fearsome therapsids were the Dinosaurs, literally terrible heads. These were massive, heavily built animals with thick skulls used for headbutting combat. Moscops was one of the most iconic Dinosaurs, a large, thick-skulled herbivore that stood about 1.5 meters at the shoulder and browsed on tough Permian vegetation. Hunting these large herbivores were the predatory Dinosaurs, animals like Titanophonius, a wolf-sized carnivore with powerful jaws and sharp interlocking teeth. But the therapsid group that most captured the imagination were the Gorgonopsians, sleek, fast, saber-toothed killers that were the T-Rex of the Permian world. Gorgonopsians ranged in size from a fox to a polar bear. Their saber teeth were not just for stabbing. They could flex their jaws impossibly wide to deliver crushing killing bites. Inostrancevia was the largest Gorgonopsian ever found, reaching up to 3.5 meters in length, a wolf-bear hybrid nightmare with saber teeth as long as a human hand. These predators hunted the dicynodonts, arguably the most successful group of Permian animals, and among the strangest creatures to ever walk this planet. Dicynodonts had a turtle-like beak for slicing plants and 2 prominent tusks. They were herbivores, but they came in an extraordinary range of sizes and ecological roles. Lystrosaurus, perhaps the most famous dicynodont, would later become one of the only large land animals to survive the end Permian extinction. But we'll come back to that. Panamaria was one of the largest dicynodonts, the size of an ox. These giants roamed in herds across Pangaea, cropping vegetation with their powerful beaks. Alongside the dicynodonts lived the cynodonts, a therapsid group that was, in every meaningful biological sense, already proto-mammals. Cynodonts had differentiated teeth like mammals, a secondary palate that allowed them to eat and breathe simultaneously, and likely had whiskers and fur-like insulation. Dimetrodon is one of the best-known cynodonts, a small, burrowing animal about the size of a large rat, with a remarkable ability to enter a torpor-like state during dry periods. But the Permian world wasn't only about synapsids. There were also true reptiles, the ancestors of lizards, crocodilians, and eventually dinosaurs. The pareiasaurs were among the strangest-looking reptiles of the Permian, heavily armored, barrel-bodied plant eaters, with elaborate bony spikes and lumps covering their thick skin. Scutosaurus was one of the largest pareiasaurs, reaching 2.5 meters long and weighing up to 400 kilograms. Its thick armor may have been its primary defense against Gorgonopsian attacks. Fascinatingly, pareiasaurs may be the ancestors of modern turtles. Some paleontologists believe the turtle shell evolved from the bony armor plates of these ancient Permian reptiles. The Permian skies were not empty either. While true flight had not yet evolved in amniotes, there were gliding reptiles, most famously Coelurosaurus. Coelurosaurus had bony rods along its sides that supported wing-like membranes, an entirely unique structure seen in no other animal before or since. The late Permian forests were dominated by Glossopteris trees, giant seed ferns that blanketed the southern supercontinent Gondwana in dense forests. Glossopteris fossils discovered on multiple now-separated continents, Antarctica, India, Africa, South America, was one of the key pieces of evidence for the theory of continental drift. But despite this richness of life, the Gorgonopsians, the dicynodonts, the pareiasaurs, the Glossopteris forests, everything was about to end. 252 million years ago, in what is now Siberia, something catastrophic began. Enormous fissures opened in the Earth's crust, and lava began to pour out, not in an explosion, but as a flood. These were the Siberian traps, a massive volcanic event covering an area larger than Western Europe in lava, and continuing for perhaps 1 million years. The eruptions released staggering quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane into the atmosphere, triggering a runaway greenhouse effect. Global temperatures rose by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. The oceans became acidified and oxygen depleted. The world began to suffocate. There is also strong evidence that the eruptions ignited massive coal deposits in Siberia, releasing even more carbon and creating a feedback loop that accelerated the warming. The result was the Great Dying, the most severe mass extinction event in the history of life on Earth. 96% of all marine species and 70% of all land vertebrate species went extinct. The ocean extinction was particularly catastrophic. The trilobites, those iconic armored invertebrates that had lived in Earth's oceans for over 270 million years, went completely extinct. Rugose corals, the dominant reef builders of the Paleozoic, also vanished completely, taking entire reef ecosystems with them. The ocean went silent. On land, the Gorgonopsians, those magnificent saber-toothed predators, went entirely extinct. Not a single lineage survived the Great Dying. The pareiasaurs vanished. The vast majority of dicynodonts perished. The Glossopteris forests burned and died. The Permian world was over. Scientists estimate it may have taken up to 10 million years for ecosystems to fully recover. 10 million years of a simplified, impoverished world. But something did survive. Lystrosaurus, that beak-faced, pig-like dicynodont, made it through, and it thrived in the emptied post-extinction world. In fact, at some early Triassic fossil sites, nearly 95% of all vertebrate fossils found belong to Lystrosaurus, a level of dominance so extreme it's sometimes called the age of Lystrosaurus. Lystrosaurus survived because it was a generalist. It could eat a wide variety of plants, burrow underground to escape extremes, and reproduce quickly. The cynodonts also made it through the extinction, and in doing so, set the stage for the eventual rise of mammals, including us. The archosaurs, a group of reptiles that had existed in the Permian as minor players, also survived and began to diversify rapidly in the empty Triassic world. From the archosaurs would eventually come the crocodilians, the pterosaurs, and the dinosaurs themselves. The Permian's end was the dinosaurs' opportunity. So let's return to the Permian world itself and appreciate what we've lost. Let's reconstruct a day in the late Permian, roughly 260 million years ago. At dawn, near a Permian river, a herd of dicynodon emerges to drink. Their tusks glint in the early light. They are cautious. They know predators may be watching, and they are right to be cautious. Hidden in the scrubland, a Gorgonopsian watches. It has been still for over an hour, conserving energy, waiting for its moment. When a young dicynodon strays from the herd, the Gorgonopsian explodes from cover, a burst of speed and muscle and glinting saber teeth. Elsewhere on this same day, in the shade of a glossopteris forest, a thrinoxodon cynodont carefully grooms its whiskers, the first animal we've met today that might have had something like fur. In the nearby river, a helicoprian shark cruises through the dark water, its bizarre tooth whorl cutting through a school of small fish. On a rocky hillside, two Scutosaurus pareiasaurs slowly move through low vegetation, their armored bodies like living tanks, utterly indifferent to the heat. Above the river, a Coelurosauravus leaps from a tree and spreads its gliding membranes, soaring gracefully between the canopy trees. This was life in the Permian, rich, complex, and utterly different from anything that came before or after, a world we lost 252 million years ago and can only visit through fossils. Let's now go deeper into the science of the end Permian extinction. Exactly how fast did it happen? The evidence from the rock record is stunning. Studies of the rock record at sites in China and elsewhere suggest the main extinction pulse may have occurred in as little as 60,000 years, almost instantaneous in geological terms. The volcanic emissions may have also triggered the release of massive methane clathrate deposits from the seafloor, enormous frozen reserves of methane that, when warmed, burst into the atmosphere. The oceans at the end of the Permian experienced widespread anoxia, a catastrophic drop in dissolved oxygen that turned large zones of the ocean into dead, suffocating water. Hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas produced by anaerobic bacteria thriving in the oxygen-depleted ocean, may have bubbled up to poison coastal land areas too. The ozone layer itself may have been damaged by the volcanic halogens, exposing the surface to intense ultraviolet radiation that sterilized plant life and caused mutations. This multi-layered catastrophe, volcanic warming, acid rain, ocean anoxia, hydrogen sulfide poisoning, and UV damage, is why scientists call it the worst extinction ever. The fossil record shows that even insects were heavily affected, and insects almost never go fully extinct. Yet during the Great Dying, several insect orders disappeared completely. Now let's revisit some of the more obscure but fascinating Permian creatures that rarely get the attention they deserve. Meet Estimenosuchus, a dinosaurian so bizarre it almost defies description. It had elaborate bony knobs and horns growing from its skull, like some prehistoric carnival creature. Estimenosuchus was likely omnivorous and the size of a rhino. Its horn structures may have been for display and intraspecific combat, the Permian equivalent of a deer's antlers. Then there is Ankylosaurus, a predatory dinosaur from South Africa with a thick skull used for ramming, and a body powerful enough to take down large prey. Ceratosphalus was another dicynodont with a remarkable feature: bony protuberances on its skull that may have formed a keratin-covered horn, like a rhinoceros. Gorgonopsians was a large cynodont from Scotland, evidence that cynodonts were already widespread across Pangaea, even in the late Permian, ready to inherit the post-extinction world. The Permian also had fascinating aquatic ecosystems in its freshwater lakes and rivers. Diplocaulus was a lepispondyle, an amphibian, with a boomerang-shaped skull unlike anything alive today. The function of Diplocaulus's boomerang head remains debated. It may have acted like a hydrofoil to help it maneuver in currents, or it may have been for display. The Permian is also notable for what it preserved in amber and rock, the earliest known evidence of complex color vision in vertebrates, and the oldest known sleep postures in therapsids. Let's talk about the Permian climate in more detail. The early Permian had ice caps at the poles. It was actually coming out of an ice age when the period began. Through the middle Permian, the climate warmed and dried. The polar ice retreated. The great coal forests of the Carboniferous gave way to drier, more open landscapes. The interior of Pangaea was probably a hyperarid desert, temperatures swinging from scorching days to freezing nights, rainfall sparse and seasonal. Only the coastal regions and the wet equatorial zones supported the richer ecosystems, where most of our known Permian fauna lived. The Permian is also when the first complex soil ecosystems were establishing themselves. Burrowing animals, fungal networks, and root systems working together to build the living soil we take for granted. The Permian also saw the evolution of more complex plant seeds, a key innovation that eventually allowed plants to colonize drier inland environments. Now, let's zoom out and consider the full context. Where does the Permian sit in the history of life on Earth? Before the Permian came the Carboniferous, the Coal Age, famous for giant dragonflies with 70 cm wingspans and millipedes the length of cars in oxygen-rich air. The Permian inherited this biological richness and took it further, evolving more complex terrestrial ecosystems with greater ecological stratification than had ever existed before. The Triassic that followed was a world largely built on the Permian's ashes, a simpler, less diverse beginning, slowly recovering the ecological complexity that had been lost. What can the Permian extinction teach us today? The parallels with modern climate change are striking and sobering. The end Permian extinction was driven by rapid C0 injection into the atmosphere, warming oceans, acidifying seas, and creating dead zones. These are precisely the processes we observe accelerating today. The Permian extinction was caused by processes operating over thousands to hundreds of thousands of years. Our current carbon release is happening in mere centuries, potentially far faster. The Permian also teaches us about resilience. Life did recover. It always has. But recovery on geological timescales means millions of years, irrelevant to any human civilization. But let us not end on catastrophe. The Permian is, above all, a celebration of life's extraordinary creativity, of how evolution fills every available niche with solutions both elegant and bizarre. The ancestors of every mammal alive today, including every human being, were there, in the Permian, as small, burrowing, whiskered proto-mammals, surviving against the odds. When you look in the mirror, you are looking at the great-great-grandchild of a Permian survivor. The lineage that began with Dimetrodon and the cynodonts eventually produced you. The Permian world is gone. Its forests turned to coal beneath our feet. Its creatures turned to fossils in museum halls. But its legacy lives on, in every mammal that breathes today. Before the dinosaurs, there was a world. A strange, wild, fascinating world. A world of sail-backed predators, saber-toothed killers, tusked plant-eaters, and armored tanks. A world that preceded the age of dinosaurs by tens of millions of years. And that shaped the biological foundations on which all later life, including ours, would be built. The next time someone talks about the age of dinosaurs, remember, the dinosaurs were late arrivals. There was already a magnificent, complex world long before they took a single step. The Permian monsters were here first, and in many ways, they were more interesting, more varied, and more surprising than anything that came after.